In a city divided by wealth and prejudice, an unlikely friendship between Jason, a young man from the wrong side of the tracks, and Sarah, the daughter of a powerful CEO, sparks a community project that promises hope. But as their initiative gains traction, dark forces emerge, threatening to unravel everything they've built. Caught between two worlds, Jason must navigate a treacherous path of suspicion, betrayal, and hidden truths. As the stakes rise and loyalties are tested, he discovers that the key to salvation might lie in the very past he's been trying to escape. Will Jason and Sarah's vision for a better future survive the storm of controversy and corruption that surrounds them? And if you love your family and want to hear more incredible stories like this one, subscribe to our channel. The school gymnasium pulsed with music and laughter as teenagers danced and mingled at the annual spring dance. In a corner, Jason stood alone, his dark skin and second-hand clothes a stark contrast to the sea of designer outfits surrounding him. He sipped his punch, observing the social dynamics at play, content to remain invisible. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the refreshment table. A group of wealthy students, led by Brad Thompson, the star quarterback, were taunting Mike, a shy boy from Jason's neighborhood. "Hey, charity case," Brad sneered, knocking the cup out of Mike's hand. "Didn't anyone tell you this dance is for people who can actually afford to be here?" Jason's jaw clenched. He'd seen this scenario play out too many times before. Usually he kept his head down, knowing that getting involved only led to trouble. But tonight, something snapped inside him. He set his cup down and strode purposefully towards the group. "Back off, Brad," Jason said, his voice steady and firm. The music seemed to fade as heads turned to watch the confrontation. Brad, towering over Jason, looked momentarily surprised before his face twisted into a sneer. "Mind your own business, ghetto boy," Brad spat. "Or do you want to join your little friend here?" Jason stood his ground, meeting Brad's gaze without flinching. "I said, back off. Mike has as much right to be here as anyone else. Or is pushing people around the only way you can feel important?" A tense silence fell over the crowd. Brad's face reddened with anger and embarrassment. For a moment, it seemed like he might throw a punch. But then, to everyone's surprise, he backed down. "Whatever," he muttered, gesturing to his friends. "Let's go. This party's lame anyway." As Brad and his cronies skulked away, the other students slowly returned to their conversations, throwing curious glances at Jason. Mike mumbled a quick thanks before disappearing into the crowd, leaving Jason alone once again. But not for long. A girl with long blonde hair and piercing blue eyes approached him, a look of admiration on her face. "That was really brave," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah Hart." Jason hesitated before shaking her hand. Everyone knew who Sarah Hart was, the daughter of the CEO of Hart Industries, the company that practically owned half the town. "Jason," he replied simply. Before they could continue their conversation, a visibly intoxicated senior stumbled up to Sarah, slinging his arm around her shoulders. "Hey, beautiful," he slurred. "How about a dance?" Sarah tried to shrug him off, looking uncomfortable. "No thanks, I'm good." The guy didn't take the hint, tightening his grip. "Come on, don't be like that. One dance won't kill you." Jason stepped forward, gently but firmly removing the guy's arm from Sarah. "She said no," he stated calmly, but with an edge to his voice that left no room for argument. The drunk senior looked ready to argue, but thought better of it when he saw the determination in Jason's eyes. He muttered something under his breath and staggered away. Sarah turned to Jason, relief evident on her face. "Thanks. Again. You seem to be making a habit of playing the hero tonight." Jason shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's nothing. Just doing what's right." They spent the rest of the evening talking, finding they had more in common than either would have expected. As the dance wound down, Sarah pulled Jason aside. "Listen," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "I've been thinking about starting a community project, something that could really make a difference. But I need help from someone who knows the neighborhood, someone the people there will trust." She paused, searching Jason's face. "Would you be interested in working on it with me?" Jason hesitated, surprised by the offer. "Why me?" he asked cautiously. Sarah smiled. "Because you're not afraid to stand up for what's right, and because I'm tired of being seen as just the CEO's daughter. I want to do something real, something that matters. What do you say?" As Jason looked into Sarah's earnest face, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was his chance to make a real difference in his community. Slowly, he nodded. "Okay," he said, "I'm in." Little did Jason know that this decision would set in motion a series of events that would change his life forever, testing his courage, his loyalty, and his very identity in ways he could never have imagined. The following week, Jason found himself sitting across from Sarah at the local cafe, feeling out of place among the hipster decor and overpriced lattes. He fidgeted with his paper cup, still unsure about the whole idea. "So, what exactly did you have in mind for this project?" Jason asked, trying to keep the skepticism out of his voice. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "I've been thinking about a mentorship program, something that pairs successful professionals with kids from your neighborhood, giving them guidance, opportunities, maybe even internships." Jason raised an eyebrow. "And you think people from your world will want to mentor kids from mine?" Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "That's where you come in. You know the community, the challenges they face. You can help me design something that will actually work, not just look good on paper." As they continued to discuss ideas, Jason found himself warming to the concept. He thought about kids like his younger brother, Marcus, who had fallen in with the wrong crowd and ended up in juvenile detention. Maybe with the right guidance, things could have been different. "Okay," Jason said finally. "I think this could work, but we need to be careful. People in my neighborhood, they're used to promises that don't pan out. We can't let them down." Sarah nodded solemnly. "I understand, and I want you to know, this isn't just some vanity project for me. I've always wanted to make a real difference, but..." She trailed off, looking down at her cup. "But what?" Jason prompted. Sarah sighed. "My father, he's never really supported my ideas about social responsibility. He thinks it's naive, that I should focus on business instead. Sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating in that world, you know?" Jason nodded, surprised to find himself relating to the rich girl's struggle. "Yeah, I get that. It's like being trapped in a box that someone else built for you." Their eyes met, a moment of understanding passing between them. For the first time, Jason saw Sarah not as the CEO's daughter, but as a person with her own battles to fight. The next day, Jason gathered his friends at their usual spot in the park to tell them about the project. He was met with a wall of skepticism and outright hostility. "Man, are you serious?" Dre, his best friend since childhood, exclaimed. "You're teaming up with the Princess of Heart Industries? The same company that's been gentrifying our neighborhood and pushing people out?" "It's not like that," Jason argued. "This is a chance to actually do something to help kids in our community." "Sounds like you're selling out to me," Tasha, Dre's girlfriend, chimed in. "What, you think hanging out with rich white folks is going to make you better than us?" Jason felt a flare of anger. "This isn't about me. It's about creating opportunities for kids who might otherwise end up on the streets or in jail. Don't you want something better for our community?" The argument went back and forth, with Jason growing increasingly frustrated. He had expected some resistance, but not this level of hostility. By the time he left, he felt drained and discouraged. Meanwhile, Sarah was facing her own backlash. At a charity gala that evening, she overheard a group of her father's associates talking. "Did you hear about Robert's daughter?" one of them said in a stage whisper. "Apparently she's starting some project in the ghetto. Probably thinks she's going to save the world or something." Another laughed derisively. "Well, we all go through that phase, don't we? She'll grow out of it once she realizes how the real world works." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment. She wanted to confront them, to defend her project, but she knew it would only make things worse. Instead, she slipped away, finding a quiet corner to collect herself. As she stood there, trying to calm her racing heart, she received a text from Jason. "Tough day. My friends think I'm selling out. Maybe this was a mistake." Sarah felt a wave of empathy wash over her. She quickly typed back, "I get it. People here think I'm naive, but we can't give up. What we're doing matters." Jason's response came a few moments later. "You're right. We knew it wouldn't be easy. We've got to stick together." Sarah smiled, feeling a renewed sense of determination. They were from different worlds, facing different challenges. But in this, they were united. Together, they would prove the doubters wrong and make a real difference. Little did they know that the resistance they faced from their peers was just the beginning. The real challenges, the ones that would test their resolve and their friendship to the limit, were yet to come. The next morning, Jason was jolted awake by a sharp knock at the door. Groggily, he made his way downstairs, his mother already at the door talking in hushed, anxious tones. As he approached, he saw two police officers standing on the porch, their faces stern and unreadable. "Jason Williams?" the taller officer asked, his hand resting casually on his belt. Jason nodded, a knot forming in his stomach. "That's me. What's this about?" The officer pulled out a notebook. "We have some questions about your association with the Hart family. Mind if we come in?" Jason's mother shot him a worried glance before stepping aside to let the officers enter. They settled in the small living room, the officers looking out of place on the worn sofa. "So Jason," the shorter officer began, "how exactly did you come to know Sarah Hart?" Jason explained about the school dance and the community project, keeping his answers brief and to the point. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions skeptical. "That's quite a coincidence," the taller officer remarked. "A kid from this neighborhood suddenly buddying up with one of the richest girls in town. You can see why that might raise some eyebrows, right?" Jason felt a flare of anger, but kept his voice steady. "It's not like that. We're just working on a project together. Is that a crime now?" The shorter officer leaned forward. "No crime. We're just trying to understand the situation. You know, make sure everything's on the up and up." As the questioning continued, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this visit than they were letting on. The officers seemed to be fishing for something, but he couldn't figure out what. Just as the tension in the room was becoming unbearable, Jason heard a familiar voice. Well, if it isn't Jason Williams." He looked up to see a third officer entering the room, and his heart sank. It was Mike Daniels, a former classmate who had always had it out for Jason. Mike had joined the police force right out of high school, and the badge seemed to have only amplified his attitude. "Officer Daniels," Jason acknowledged stiffly. Mike's lips curled into a smirk. "Never thought I'd see the day when Jason Williams was rubbing elbows with the city's elite. Must be nice, huh? Getting a taste of how the other half lives?" The implication in his tone was clear, and Jason felt his fists clench. "It's not like that," he repeated, struggling to keep his cool. Mike circled the room, his eyes never leaving Jason. "You know, folks around here are talking. They're wondering how a kid like you suddenly got so cozy with the Hart family. Some even think you might be taking advantage of the situation, if you know what I mean." Jason stood up abruptly, his patience wearing thin. "If you've got something to say, just say it." Mike held up his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, I'm just telling you what I hear. but you might want to think carefully about the company you're keeping. People from your background getting mixed up with rich folks? It rarely ends well." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air as the officers finally left. Jason's mother turned to him, her face etched with worry. "Jason, what have you gotten yourself into?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Everything okay? Heard there were cops at your place." Jason sighed, wondering how news had traveled so fast. He quickly typed back, "Yeah, just some questions. Nothing to worry about." But as he stared at the message, he realized he wasn't sure if that was true. The police visit had left him shaken, confused about what was really going on. Was he in over his head? Was he putting his family at risk by associating with Sarah? Just then, another text from Sarah came through. "Don't let them scare you. We're doing something good here. We're stronger together." Jason read the message several times, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to back out, to return to the safety of anonymity. But another part, the part that had stood up to Brad at the dance, that had dreamed of making a real difference, refused to give up. With a deep breath, he texted back, "You're right. We can't let them win. What's our next move?" As he hit send, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a line, one that he might not be able to step back from. But looking around at his small, cramped house, at the worry lines etched on his mother's face, he knew he had to try. For his family, for his community, and for the chance to prove that someone like him could make a real difference, he had to see this through. Little did Jason know that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would test his resolve, his loyalty, and his very identity in ways he could never have imagined. The true challenges were just beginning, and the line between right and wrong was about to become very, very blurred. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as people filed in for the meeting. Jason stood at the front of the room, trying to project confidence despite the butterflies in his stomach. Sarah stood beside him, her presence both reassuring and slightly intimidating. "You ready for this?" she whispered, giving him an encouraging smile. Jason nodded, taking a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." As the last few stragglers took their seats, Jason stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice stronger than he felt. "We're here to talk about a new project that we believe can make a real difference in our community." He went on to outline the mentorship program, explaining how it would connect local youth with successful professionals, providing guidance, support, and opportunities that might otherwise be out of reach. As he spoke, he could see a mix of reactions in the audience: curiosity, skepticism, and even a few nods of approval. When he finished, Sarah took over, detailing the resources that would be available through the Hart Industries Foundation. She emphasized that this wasn't just a handout, but a partnership aimed at empowering the community. As Sarah wrapped up her part, Jason scanned the room, feeling a glimmer of hope. Maybe this could work after all. But then he saw a hand go up in the back of the room, and his heart sank as he recognized Mr. Johnson, a longtime community activist known for his distrust of outsiders. "Yes, Mr. Johnson," Jason acknowledged, bracing himself. The older man stood up, his eyes narrowed. "This all sounds very nice," he began, his tone anything but friendly. "But we've heard promises like this before. How do we know this isn't just another way for rich folks to feel good about themselves while nothing really changes?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Jason felt the mood in the room shift, the tentative hope giving way to familiar cynicism. "That's a fair question," Jason replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. "And you're right. We've all seen projects come and go without making a real impact. But this is different. We're not just throwing money at the problem. We're creating real connections, real opportunities." Mr. Johnson wasn't satisfied. "And what about you, young man? How do we know you haven't just been bought off? That you're not just a token to make them look good? The accusation stung, but before Jason could respond, Sarah stepped forward. "If I may," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I understand your skepticism. I know that my family's company doesn't have the best reputation in this community, and I know that no amount of words from me will change that." She paused, looking around the room. "But I'm not here as a representative of Hart Industries. I'm here as someone who believes that we can do better, that we have a responsibility to do better. And I'm here because Jason showed me that change is possible if we're willing to work together." Her words hung in the air, and Jason could see people shifting in their seats, uncertainty replacing hostility. But Mr. Johnson wasn't done. "Pretty words," he scoffed, "but actions speak louder. What guarantee do we have that this isn't just another empty promise?" This time, it was Jason who stepped forward. "No guarantees, Mr. Johnson. Just a commitment. From me to you, to all of you. I grew up here. I know the challenges we face, and I know that no one from the outside can solve our problems for us, but they can help us solve them ourselves." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of people he'd known his whole life. "This program isn't about handouts. It's about creating opportunities. Opportunities that I wish I'd had, that I wish my brother had had. And if it doesn't work, if it doesn't deliver what we promise, then I'll be the first one to stand up and say so." A hush fell over the room. Jason could feel the weight of expectation, of hope and skepticism battling in equal measure. Then, from the back of the room, a new voice spoke up. "I say we give them a chance." Heads turned to see Mrs. Taylor, the elderly woman who ran the local food bank, standing up. "Lord knows we need all the help we can get, and if these young people are willing to try, then the least we can do is meet them halfway." Slowly, nods of agreement began to spread through the crowd. The tension in the room didn't disappear entirely, but it eased, replaced by a cautious optimism. As the meeting wrapped up, with people coming forward to sign up or ask questions, Jason felt a mix of relief and trepidation. They'd won this battle, but he knew it was just the beginning. The real work and the real challenges lay ahead. Sarah caught his eye, giving him a thumbs up. Despite everything, Jason found himself smiling back. They'd taken the first step. Now they just had to prove that their actions would match their words. As the last of the attendees filed out, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something big, something that could change everything. For better or worse, there was no turning back now. Weeks passed, and the mentorship program began to take shape. Jason found himself juggling his studies with frequent meetings, phone calls, and planning sessions. The project was gaining momentum, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, of hope for the future. But as Jason's world expanded, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving something behind. This feeling crystallized one afternoon as he sat in a sleek conference room at Hart Industries, discussing the next phase of the project with Sarah and a group of executives. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Excusing himself, Jason stepped out into the hallway to check the message. His heart dropped as he read the words on the screen. "Marcus getting out next week. Needs a place to stay. Mom." Marcus, his older brother. The golden boy turned cautionary tale. Jason leaned against the wall, memories flooding back. Marcus had always been the smart one, the charming one, the one everyone said was going places. But then came the wrong crowd, the bad choices, and finally, the arrest that shattered their family's dreams. Now, after 3 years in prison, Marcus was coming home, and Jason didn't know how to feel about it. "Everything okay?" Sarah's voice startled him out of his thoughts. Jason quickly pocketed his phone. "Yeah, just family stuff. Nothing to worry about." Sarah gave him a concerned look, but didn't press the issue. They returned to the meeting, but Jason's mind was elsewhere, How could he reconcile his new life, his new purpose, with the brother who represented everything he was trying to leave behind? The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Jason helped his mother clean out the spare room, bought new sheets, stocked the fridge. All the while, a knot of anxiety grew in his stomach. Finally, the day arrived. Jason stood with his mother outside the prison gates, watching as Marcus emerged, blinking in the bright sunlight. He looked older, harder, the boyish charm replaced by a wary guardedness. The ride home was quiet, filled with awkward small talk and long silences. It wasn't until later that night, when their mother had gone to bed, that Marcus finally broached the subject. "So, little brother," he said, his voice low, "I hear you've been busy while I was away, making new friends in high places." Jason tensed. "It's not like that. I'm working on a project, trying to make things better around here." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Make things better? By cozying up to the people who've been keeping us down all these years?" "It's not about cozying up to anyone," Jason argued. "It's about creating opportunities, giving kids a chance to..." "To what?" Marcus interrupted. "To become like you? To forget where they came from?" The words stung, hitting too close to Jason's own doubts. "I haven't forgotten anything," he said quietly. "I'm doing this for us, for the neighborhood." Marcus stood up, pacing the small living room. "Look, I get it. You're trying to do something good, but you're playing their game, by their rules. And trust me, little brother, those rules weren't made for people like us." He turned to Jason, his eyes intense. "I've got plans, Jason, big plans, ways to really change things around here, and I could use your help. Someone smart, someone who knows the neighborhood. What do you say? You in?" Jason hesitated, torn between loyalty to his brother and the commitment he'd made to Sarah and the project. I can't, Marcus. I've made promises. People are counting on me." Marcus's face hardened. "Promises to who? To that rich girl? To the people who've been stepping on us our whole lives?" He shook his head. "I thought you were smarter than that, Jason. I thought you understood how the world really works." "Maybe I understand it better than you think," Jason shot back, his own anger rising. "Maybe I found a way to change things without breaking the law, without throwing my life away." The brothers stared at each other, years of unspoken resentment and misunderstanding hanging between them. Finally, Marcus turned away. "Fine," he said, his voice cold. "Do what you gotta do. But don't come crying to me when you realize they're just using you." As Marcus stormed off to his room, Jason sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. He'd known this reunion would be difficult, but he hadn't expected to feel so lost. Part of him wanted to run after Marcus, to tell him he was in, to fall back into the familiar patterns of their youth. But another part, the part that had stood up at that community meeting, that had seen the hope in people's eyes, refused to let go of the future he was trying to build. His phone buzzed again, a message from Sarah. "Meeting tomorrow to finalize the first round of mentorships. You ready?" Jason stared at the screen, feeling the weight of his two worlds pressing in on him. With a deep breath, he typed back, "I'll be there." As he hit send, Jason knew he was making a choice that would shape not just his future, but the future of his family and his community. He just hoped it was the right one. Little did he know that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would test his loyalties, challenge his beliefs, and force him to confront the true cost of chasing his dreams. The mentorship program was gaining traction, and Jason found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Local news outlets had picked up the story, praising the initiative as a model for community corporate partnerships. Jason's face was suddenly everywhere, in newspapers, on local TV, and all over social media. One morning, as Jason was rushing out the door for another meeting, he nearly collided with a stern-looking man in a suit. "Jason Williams?" the man asked, flashing a badge. Detective Reeves, Metro PD. We need to ask you a few questions about your involvement with the Hart family. Jason's stomach dropped. Now? I have a meeting. This won't take long, Reeves interrupted, gesturing to an unmarked car parked at the curb. Please. The ride to the police station was tense and silent. Jason's mind raced, trying to figure out what this could be about. As they entered an interrogation room, he saw Mike Daniels, the officer from his past, leaning against the wall with a smirk. Well, well, Mike drawled. Look who's moved up in the world. Detective Reeves sat across from Jason, his face impassive. Mr. Williams, we've been investigating some irregularities in Hart Industries' financial dealings. Your name has come up in connection with a new community project. Care to explain your role? Jason took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. I'm helping to run a mentorship program. It's all above board. You can check the paperwork. Oh, we will. Reeves cut in. But what we're more interested in is how a young man from your background suddenly became so closely involved with one of the city's most powerful families. The implication was clear, and Jason felt a flare of anger. If you're suggesting... We're not suggesting anything, Mike interrupted, his tone mocking. We're just trying to understand. I mean, it's not every day that someone from the projects ends up rubbing elbows with billionaires. Unless, of course, there's something in it for them. Jason gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. I'm not involved in anything illegal. The program is legitimate. We're trying to help people. Help people, Mike scoffed. Or help yourself? The questioning continued for hours. They pressed him on every detail of his relationship with Sarah, every aspect of the program's finances, every connection he had in the neighborhood. By the time they finally let him go, Jason felt drained and shaken. As he stepped out of the station, he saw Sarah waiting in her car, her face etched with worry. Jason, what happened? Are you okay? He slumped into the passenger seat, suddenly exhausted. They're investigating Hart Industries. They think I might be involved in something illegal. Sarah's eyes widened. That's ridiculous. We haven't done anything wrong. I'll call my father's lawyers. No, Jason said firmly. No lawyers. That'll just make it look like we have something to hide. Sarah fell silent, then reached out and squeezed his hand. We'll figure this out, Jason. Together. But as they drove away, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. The police investigation, Marcus's return, the growing spotlight on the program, it all felt like too much. Over the next few weeks, the pressure continued to mount. Jason found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, wondering if he was being watched. The once exciting meetings and planning sessions now felt fraught with tension. One evening, as he was leaving the community center after a particularly stressful day, he heard a familiar voice. Tough day at the office, little brother? Marcus stepped out of the shadows, a knowing look on his face. Told you they'd turn on you eventually. It's not too late, you know. My offer still stands. Jason hesitated, tempted for a moment by the simplicity of going back to his old life, of not having to constantly prove himself. But then he thought of the kids in the program, of the hope he'd seen in their eyes. I can't, Marcus, he said quietly. I've come too far. Marcus shook his head, disappointment clear on his face. Your funeral, bro. Just don't say I didn't warn you. As Marcus walked away, Jason's phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Emergency meeting tomorrow. Some issues have come up with the program. We need to talk. Jason stared at the message, a sense of dread settling over him. He'd known this path wouldn't be easy, but he hadn't expected it to be this hard. As he headed home, he couldn't help but wonder, had he made a terrible mistake? Was he in over his head? And most importantly, how was he going to find his way out of this mess? Little did he know that the true test of his resolve and the biggest challenge to everything he'd built was just around the corner. The emergency meeting Sarah had called was tense from the moment Jason walked into the room. The usual buzz of excitement was replaced by hushed whispers and worried glances. Sarah sat at the head of the table, her face drawn and serious. "Thanks for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice strained. "We've hit a complication with the program." Jason's stomach tightened. "What kind of complication?" Sarah took a deep breath. "One of our mentees, Darius, was arrested last night. He was caught breaking into a car at one of our fundraising events." The room erupted into a flurry of questions and exclamations. Jason felt the blood drain from his face. Darius was one of the kids he'd personally vouched for, a bright teenager who'd shown real promise in the program. "That's not all," Sarah continued, raising her voice above the commotion. "The police are suggesting that this might be part of a larger operation. They're investigating whether our program is being used as a cover for criminal activity." The accusation hung in the air like a thundercloud. Jason felt all eyes turn to him, the unspoken question clear on everyone's faces. Had he brought a criminal element into their midst? "That's ridiculous," Jason said, his voice stronger than he felt. "Darius made a mistake, but that doesn't mean the whole program is corrupt." One of the board members, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, spoke up. "Be that as it may, Mr. Williams, this incident has raised serious concerns. We need to consider the possibility that your connections in the community might be a liability rather than an asset." Jason felt a surge of anger. "My connections? You mean the people this program is supposed to be helping? The whole point was to bridge the gap between our worlds, not to treat everyone from my neighborhood like a potential criminal." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Sarah cleared her throat. "Jason's right. We can't abandon our mission at the first sign of trouble, but we do need to address this situation head-on." The meeting dragged on for hours, with heated debates about increased background checks, stricter monitoring, and even the possibility of suspending the program altogether. By the time it was over, Jason felt drained and disillusioned. As he was leaving, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Detective Reeves, his face grim. "We need to talk, Mr. Williams. Now." Jason followed the detective to a quiet corner, his heart pounding. Reeves didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Your friend Darius sang like a canary. He says you've been using the mentorship program to recruit kids for some kind of criminal enterprise. Want to tell me what that's all about?" Jason felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "That's a lie. I would never—" "Save it," Reeves cut him off. "We've got witnesses placing you at several meetings with known criminals in your neighborhood, including your brother, Marcus. Care to explain that?" Jason's mind raced. The meetings Reeves was talking about, they were community outreach events, trying to get former offenders involved in positive activities. But how could he explain that without sounding like he was making excuses? "Look," Jason said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm not involved in anything illegal. The program is legitimate. If Darius is saying otherwise, he's lying." Reeves leaned in close, his voice low and threatening. "I hope for your sake that's true, Williams, because if I find out you've been using this program as a front for criminal activity, I'll make sure you go down hard. You and your rich little girlfriend both." As Reeves walked away, Jason saw Mike Daniels watching from across the room, a satisfied smirk on his face. The message was clear. They were closing in, and they weren't going to stop until they brought him down. Jason's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Heard about your boy Darius. Told you this would happen. Last chance, little brother. You in or out?" Jason stared at the message, feeling the walls closing in around him. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd believed in, was crumbling. And now he faced an impossible choice: stand his ground and risk losing everything, or go back to the world he'd been trying so hard to escape. As he left the building, his mind in turmoil, Jason didn't notice the figure watching him from the shadows. Someone who had been observing everything, waiting for the perfect moment to make their move. Someone who held the key to unraveling the entire mystery. If only Jason knew where to look. The true test of Jason's character, and the shocking revelation that would turn everything on its head, was about to begin. The following week, Jason and Sarah decided to host a fundraising gala for the mentorship program, hoping to quell the growing doubts and show a united front. The event was held at an upscale hotel downtown, a world away from Jason's neighborhood. As Jason adjusted his borrowed suit in the mirror, he couldn't shake the feeling of being an imposter. The weight of recent events pressed heavily on his shoulders. He'd spent the week dodging calls from Detective Reeves, trying to keep the program running smoothly, and attempting to reach Darius, who seemed to have vanished after posting bail. Sarah appeared beside him, stunning in a sleek black dress. "Ready?" she asked, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Jason nodded, steeling himself. "As I'll ever be." The ballroom was a sea of designer gowns and tailored suits. Jason recognized faces from TV and magazines, power brokers and influencers who could make or break their program with a single word. He plastered on a smile, shaking hands and making small talk, all the while feeling like he was walking on eggshells. Midway through the evening, Sarah clinked her glass, calling for attention. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice clear and confident. "Tonight, we're not just raising funds. We're investing in the future of our city, in the potential of young people who just need a chance to shine." As Sarah continued her speech, Jason scanned the room. His eyes landed on a group of young men near the back, looking uncomfortable in ill-fitting suits. With a jolt, he recognized them as some of the mentees from the program. He'd insisted they be invited, to show donors the real faces behind the initiative. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Jason turned to see Marcus pushing his way through the crowd, his face twisted with anger. "So this is where the real decisions get made, huh?" Marcus shouted, his voice silencing the room. "In fancy ballrooms, while our people struggle in the streets?" Security guards moved to intercept him, but Jason held up a hand, stepping forward. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "Showing these people the truth," Marcus spat. "You think you're making a difference? You're just a puppet for the rich, brother, a token they can parade around to make themselves feel better." The room was dead silent, all eyes on the unfolding drama. Jason felt a mix of anger and shame burning in his chest. "That's not true," he said, trying to keep his voice level. "We're creating real opportunities." "Opportunities?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Like the opportunity you gave Darius to get arrested, to have his life ruined?" At the mention of Darius, several of the mentees shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a tall boy named Jamal, stepped forward. "Hey, that's not fair. Jason's been trying to help us." "Help you become like him?" Marcus interrupted. "To forget where you came from? To dance for the masters in their fancy parties?" The tension in the room was palpable. Jason could see the doubt and confusion on the faces of the mentees, the shock and discomfort on the donors. Everything was unraveling. Suddenly, a scuffle broke out near the back of the room. One of the mentees had bumped into a waiter, sending a tray of champagne glasses crashing to the floor. In the chaos that followed, Jason saw one of the security guards roughly grabbing Jamal's arm. "Get your hands off me!" Jamal shouted, pulling away. The situation escalated quickly. More security guards rushed in. Donors began backing away in alarm, and the mentees clustered together defensively. Jason tried to intervene, to calm things down, but his voice was lost in the growing uproar. In the midst of the chaos, Jason caught sight of Sarah. She stood frozen, her face a mask of shock and dismay. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, Jason saw the gulf between their worlds yawning wide. As the police sirens wailed in the distance, Jason felt a crushing sense of failure. The carefully constructed bridge between two worlds was crumbling, and he was caught in the middle, unable to stop it. In the aftermath of the disastrous gala, as Jason sat in a police station giving yet another statement, he couldn't help but wonder. Had he been naive to think he could change things? Had Marcus been right all along? But even as doubt gnawed at him, a part of Jason refused to give up. There was more going on here than met the eye, and he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Little did Jason know that the events of this night would set in motion a chain of revelations that would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew, forcing him to confront hard truths about loyalty, justice, and the true nature of change. The fallout from the gala disaster was swift and severe. Local news outlets, which had once praised the mentorship program, now ran sensationalized stories about gang infiltration and misguided charity. Donors pulled their support in droves, and even the most steadfast board members began to distance themselves from the project. Sarah had gone silent, not responding to Jason's calls or texts. He couldn't shake the image of her face that night, the shock, the disappointment, the hint of fear. Had he lost her trust for good? As Jason sat on the steps of his family's small house, head in his hands, he felt more alone than ever. His mother watched him worriedly from the window, but he couldn't bring himself to explain the depth of the mess he was in. Suddenly his phone buzzed, an unknown number. Jason hesitated before answering. "Hello? Jason Williams?" An unfamiliar voice, low and urgent. "Don't react. Just listen. You're being set up. The cops, the media, even some people you think are on your side, they're all part of it. Meet me at the old factory on 4th Street in an hour if you want to know the truth." The line went dead. Jason stared at his phone, mind racing. Was this a trap? Another attempt by the police to entangle him in something illegal? Or could it be the break he'd been hoping for? As he debated his next move, another text came through. This one from Sarah. "We need to talk. It's over, Jason. I'm sorry." The words hit him like a physical blow. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd believed in, was crumbling around him. In that moment, Jason made a decision. He had nothing left to lose. An hour later, Jason cautiously approached the abandoned factory, every sense on high alert. As he rounded a corner, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Jamal, the mentee from the gala. "Jamal, what are you doing here?" Jason asked, confusion and relief mingling in his voice. "Trying to make things right," Jamal replied, his young face serious. "I know who set you up, Jason, and it goes way deeper than you think." Over the next hour, Jamal laid out a conspiracy that left Jason reeling. The mentorship program had been targeted from the beginning, not just by corrupt cops like Mike Daniels, but by powerful figures who saw it as a threat to the status quo. Darius hadn't been arrested by chance. He'd been pressured into committing a crime and then coerced into implicating Jason. "But why?" Jason asked, struggling to process the information. "Why go to all this trouble?" Jamal's eyes were hard. "Because you were making a difference, man. For real." And that scared them. The powers that be. They don't want kids from the hood seeing that there's another way. They need us desperate, angry, turning to crime. That's how they justify keeping us down. As the full picture emerged, Jason felt a mix of anger and determination rising within him. "We need to expose this," he said. "But who would believe us?" "That's where I come in," a new voice said. Jason turned to see a woman stepping out of the shadows, a press badge hanging around her neck. Melissa Chen, investigative reporter. "I've been tracking this story for months, but I needed someone on the inside to confirm it. You two just did that." Jason's mind was spinning. "So what do we do now?" Melissa's eyes gleamed with purpose. "Now? We blow this whole thing wide open, but it won't be easy. These people are powerful, and they won't go down without a fight. Are you ready for that, Jason? Because once we start, there's no turning back. Jason thought of everything he'd been through. The hope, the disappointment, the betrayals. He thought of the kids in the program, of his brother Marcus, of Sarah. He thought of his neighborhood and the change he'd dreamed of making. With a deep breath, he nodded. I'm ready. Let's do this. As they began to plan their next move, Jason felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be dangerous, filled with challenges he couldn't even imagine. But for the first time in weeks, he felt like he was on the right path. Little did he know that the biggest revelation, the one that would shake him to his core and force him to question everything he thought he knew about loyalty and justice, was yet to come. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of clandestine meetings, late-night research, and careful planning. Jason, Jamal, and Melissa worked tirelessly to piece together the complex web of corruption and deceit that had nearly destroyed the mentorship program. As they dug deeper, a shocking truth emerged. Officer Mike Daniels, Jason's longtime antagonist, was at the center of it all. He wasn't just a corrupt cop. He was the linchpin in a vast network of illegal activities that reached into the highest levels of city government and law enforcement. It's bigger than we thought, Melissa said one night, spreading out a web of documents and photographs. Daniels has been using his position to run a protection racket, extorting businesses in low-income neighborhoods. The mentorship program threatened to disrupt that by giving kids alternatives to crime. Jason felt a mix of anger and vindication. So that's why he's been after me all this time. He saw me as a threat to his operation. Jamal nodded grimly. And he used Darius to try and discredit you. Man, I can't believe we didn't see it sooner. As they continued to gather evidence, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The pieces fit, but there was still a gap in their understanding. That gap was filled in the most unexpected way. One evening, as Jason was leaving a meeting with Melissa, he found Sarah waiting for him outside. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "Jason," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something. Something terrible." Over coffee in a quiet diner, Sarah revealed the final piece of the puzzle. Her father, the CEO of Hart Industries, had known about Daniel's operation all along. In fact, he'd been profiting from it, using the illegal activities to manipulate property values and push through lucrative development deals. "He told me it was for the greater good," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "That sometimes you have to work within a broken system to change it. I wanted to believe him, but I can't anymore. Not after seeing what it's done to you, to the kids in the program." Jason sat in stunned silence, trying to process this final betrayal. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd believed in, had been built on a foundation of lies. But as the initial shock wore off, Jason felt a new resolve hardening within him. This wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about exposing the truth, no matter the cost. With Sarah's insider knowledge added to their investigation, the team now had everything they needed to bring the whole corrupt system crashing down. The day of reckoning came sooner than any of them expected. At a press conference called to address the growing concerns about crime in the city, Jason and his allies made their move. As the mayor stepped up to the podium, flanked by Officer Daniels and other city officials, Jason emerged from the crowd, Melissa and her camera crew right behind him. "Before you continue, Mr. Mayor," Jason said, his voice ringing out clear and strong, "there's something the people of this city need to know." What followed was a carefully orchestrated exposé, broadcast live across local networks. Jason, supported by Jamal, Sarah, and others who had been victimized by the corrupt system, laid out the entire sordid tale. Melissa provided hard evidence, financial records, surveillance footage, sworn testimonies from whistleblowers. The reaction was immediate. and explosive. Officer Daniels tried to flee, but was quickly apprehended. The mayor and several other officials were taken in for questioning. Sarah's father, watching from his office, saw his empire beginning to crumble. In the days that followed, the city was in uproar. Investigations were launched, arrests were made, and long-buried truths came to light. The mentorship program, far from being shut down, was held up as an example of the positive change that had been so desperately needed. As Jason stood outside the community center, watching a new group of mentees arrive for their first session, he felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in what they'd accomplished, sadness for the betrayals he'd endured, hope for the future they were building. Sarah approached, her face etched with a similar mix of emotions. "So," she said softly, "where do we go from here?" Jason looked out at the city skyline, thinking of all they'd been through and all that still lay ahead. "Forward," he said simply. "We go forward, together." As they walked into the community center, ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold, Jason realized that his journey had come full circle. He'd set out to change his community, and in the process, he'd changed himself. He'd learned the true meaning of justice, of loyalty, and of the power of standing up for what's right, no matter the odds. The road ahead would not be easy, but with the truth finally out in the open, and with allies both old and new by his side, Jason was ready to face it. The real work of rebuilding trust, of healing wounds, and of creating lasting change was just beginning. And this time, they would do it right.